What's up, Forward family? It's BigBossFabo, FortWorthFabian. I'm back with a video for you guys, but I'm actually doing another reaction video to MrBallen, and this is what I saw in my room still haunts me. So this was actually recommended to me in association with my last MrBallen reaction. I had actually done a reaction to, like, I think one of his older videos, and not his old videos, but it wasn't like fairly new upload. I don't know why I'm saying a million times, but it was the most insane man on TV. I dropped that about 2 days ago. I got several recommendations in association with that reaction. People had recommended I check out some of his older uploads. So let me just give a quick shout out. Who had recommended this song? Catalina Gabriela Chalbanu. Catalina Gabriela Chalbanu. Hopefully I pronounced that right. But she had recommended that I do a reaction to his first video. What I saw in my room still haunts me. So I kind of see this in passing on his channel. I don't even really jump into it because, you know, his content he releases nowadays is a whole lot more modern. The quality is a whole lot better. But anyways, supposedly this was a good one. So I'm excited to do a reaction to it. It looks fairly old. But that's aside from the point. Like, comment, subscribe, hit the notification bell. Follow me on Instagram, Twitter at FortWorthFabian. It's the road to 1 million subscribers, man. Let's get into this MrBallen reaction. Check out my MrBallen playlist, link provided in the description down below.
Where is it? I heard the door open. I heard the bells. I heard the pot. I heard the footsteps. I saw the door open. I see the thing walk in. I watched it walk down the aisle. I watched it bend over. It's in the room. Where is it? And this is night 1. There's 2 more nights of this, and it gets worse. When I was 16 years old, I was an avid snowboarder. Starting from the time I was like 12 years old, I used to always go snowboarding with the same 2 guys, my 2 very close friends, Wolf and Nick. Every winter, me, Nick, and Wolf would go up to Nick's family's cabin that was up in the
cabin story.
New Hampshire. Just snowboard, and it was great. Every time we went up to this cabin in New Hampshire, it would be me, Wolf, Nick, and then Nick's mom and dad. Unexpectedly, leading into my 16-year-old winter, Nick's father passed away. We were actually planning on going on a trip to the mountains that winter. And I remember speaking to Wolf and being like, I don't know if it's even appropriate to ask about this trip, because we knew that Nick was very close to his father, and not to mention, like, every time we went on this particular, trip up to the mountains, Nick's dad was always with us, and it just seemed like, how can we possibly now go on this snowboarding trip? Not only is it a low priority item, but just the dynamic is all different now. Nick called us and was like, hey, so we are still going to do the snowboarding trip to the cabin in New Hampshire. And so, Wolf and I, we spoke and we're like, let's just go with it. I mean, maybe they want to do something that is maybe is a fond memory of their father, their husband. And so we agreed to go. So he passes away maybe a few months before we end up going up to the mountains. And so the grief was still definitely there, but also just, again, that the dynamic was it was like the elephant in the room, right? Like, as we're driving up, we drove in the same car, me, Wolf, Nick, and then Nick's mom was driving. It was so apparent that Nick's dad was missing, because he was always in the car with us when we drove up. Anyhow, so we make the trip up to New Hampshire, and we're planning to be up there for 3 days. So the house itself wasn't really a cabin, it was a house, it was a small house. It was on a mountain, and if you think about the way a mountain works, it's a slope. And so in order to have a house level on a mountain, a portion of it needs to be on stilts, right?
Build a
platform that's
platform
kind of hanging off the mountain. And then the other part of the house is kind of like embedded in the mountain itself.
Yeah.
And when you drive up to the house, there's a wraparound porch that goes around the house. The majority of it is on the stilted section of the house. right? So if you're on the wraparound porch, your footsteps are going to echo. Like you can hear those footsteps because you're above the ground. When you step into the house, you open a door. It actually opens inwardly. There were sleigh bells that were on the door, on the inside of the door. So anytime you open the door, you hear those sleigh bells ringing. And as soon as you step foot into the house, if you took one step into the house, right? So you step on the wraparound porch, you open the door, sleigh bells ring. When you step into the house, your right foot would be in the kitchen. You'd be standing on linoleum. And your left foot would be on shag carpet, which is like the dining room. And that's...
See, this is more just like clear storytelling. You know, like I mentioned, I guess he wasn't incorporating a lot of the visuals, still images, photos, you know, in his early videos. But you can tell he already had a gift for storytelling early on, right? It's cool to see the trajectory. Like this is where he started, to see where he's at right now.
That's the way the house is laid out. As soon as you walk in, kitchen on your right, dining room on your left. And if you keep walking, you're going to enter into this living room. And if you turned around in the living room and looked up, you would see a lofted second floor. If you walk into the house, again, your right foot's in the kitchen, your left foot's in the dining room, and you walked as if you were going into that living space, but stopped about halfway across the house, you could look to your right and there'd be one hallway. There's only one hallway. It's a small house. And this hallway is bringing you, call it, into the mountain. If you think about, again, the layout of the house, you have a portion of the house that's sitting in the mountain and a portion of the house that's on stilts. Well, this hallway leads into the section of the house that's in the mountain. And if you go down this hallway and it turns left, it's a short little hallway, it brings you to one room. And that room is where me, Nick, and Wolf would stay every time we went snowboarding at this mountain. That room, if you go into it, it's a corner-fed room. You open the door, and immediately to your right is a bunk bed. I would always sleep on the bottom bunk, and Wolf would sleep on the top bunk. Our feet would be closest to the door. In the center of the room, with the remaining space, because this is not a big room, there was like a queen-size bed. It was like a slightly larger bed that sat basically in all of the free space that was left over in the room. It was sitting right in the middle of the room. And that's where Nick would sleep. So basically the room was completely packed with 3 places to sleep and really not much else. There was a very small space between the queen size bed and the bunk bed. So you could walk between those two, but that was about it. So that layout's very important, and you'll see why. We snowboard for the day, we come back to the cabin, and me, Nick, and Wolf decide we're gonna crash super early and get up early and have a full day of riding ahead of us because we're avid snowboarders. So we go to our room, the one that's kind of, you go down that hallway and you get to the room I just described. We planned on going to bed early, but we were excited, and so we stayed up gaming for a bit. And then maybe around like 11 or 12 o'clock at night, Nick, who again is in the queen size bed, and Wolf was in the top bunk, they ultimately fall asleep. I was still awake, and what struck me, and it always struck me whenever I slept in this room, is when you turn off all the electronics and you're just laying in bed in this house, in particular this room, it is pitch black. There's no windows. You're in the segment of the house that's, you know, in the mountain. It is truly pitch black. Not to mention the house itself, there weren't really any neighbors nearby because this house, Nick's family had purchased it a while ago when this used to be an active ski resort, the mountain itself that it was on. But it wasn't anymore, and most people that were living there had left and sold their property. But a few people had decided to stay, and so Nick's family was one of them. So they had this cabin on an abandoned ski resort. There was virtually no streetlights, there's virtually no neighbors, and so at night, when you're laying in this room, like I was this night, you're really struck by just how dark and quiet it is. I mean, basically no white noise, I mean silence and pitch black. And so I'm laying there, and one other detail that needs to be brought up before we get into what actually happens. So Nick had 2 much older brothers. They were in their 30s, and you know, we're 16 years old. And we were expecting one of them, we didn't know which, to swing by the house at some point over the next few days. That's what Nick's mom had said.
You can already kind of guess where the story's going to go because he's already detailing sounds the house makes. And, you know, he mentioned being on that platform, you know, kind of outside the house area to where you could hear footsteps on, probably if you were inside the home, to where there was a door that had, like little chimes on it, to where you had a sense that somebody was coming through the front door. So I mean, one can kind of guess where this is going. That not to give it all away.
Nick had kind of reiterated it, and I think that Wolf and I understood that, now that Nick's father was gone, that they were just kind of trying to find a way to fill the void that was left from the father passing. And so we were expecting over the course of that weekend for someone, one of the two brothers, to come to this house and stay with us for a night or whatever it was. I had never met either of these two brothers. I knew they existed, but I had never met them before. But somewhere in the back of my mind, I know that probably one of them is going to show up at some point, maybe tonight, maybe tomorrow, whenever it is. Man, it's giving me goosebumps just thinking about this. So that night, as I'm laying in bed, I'm thinking about how dark and quiet it is. I remember the only light in the room was the digital clock, the little red digital clock, and it was like a beacon in the light, and that doesn't emit much light, but when it's pure darkness, it does. And I just could not fall asleep. I remember I got to a place where I started counting how many hours of sleep I might get if I fell asleep right then and there, which is never a good sign. That means you're not close to sleeping.
Yeah.
If you're like, okay, if I fell asleep now, I'll get 3 hours and 22 minutes of sleep.
I hate that, bro.
Right? Like, that's where I was at mentally.
Like, man, I gotta be up in 3 hours. I'm still awake. That's the worst feeling. He's exactly right. When you at that point, it's kind of like you're not getting any sleep that night. At first, I thought he was gonna say he was starting counting sheep. Does that really work? If you count sheep, you fall asleep.
At some point, I think it was around 3 a.m.
Uh-oh. That's the worst time, my boy. I remember looking
at the clock and thinking, wow, it's gotten so late and I'm still awake. I hear footsteps on the wraparound porch. In a situation where, as I'm telling it, you're going to think, how did you not raise, a red flag immediately? In real time, in real life, your brain goes to great measures to convince you that everything is okay. It really takes an enormous amount of anomalies to stack up for your brain to say something's wrong. And so that's what happened in this first night. I hear footsteps on the wraparound porch, and I immediately assume, even though we're talking, it's like 3 a.m, I just assume that it's got to be one of Nick's brothers arriving to be a part of this weekend getaway. So I really actually didn't think anything of it. I actually just thought, well, when he comes in the house, if he happens to come in here to check on us, I'll just pretend to be asleep in case, he were to see that I was awake. I don't want to have a conversation with him. Number one, it's 3 a.m. Number two, I don't know the guy. I'm just going to pretend to be asleep. So that's all I'm thinking about. Not worried, not scared, not anything. Footsteps on the wraparound porch, and then the door opens, and I can hear the sleigh bells that are on the door itself. I can hear those chime as the door opens.
Did they have a lock on this door? And isn't his friend's mom supposed to be in the house? So is there another room that she was sleeping in, or am I just confused?
Again, no part of me is concerned about this. I'm thinking it's a little bit weird that they're arriving at 3 a.m, but we knew that his brothers had these weird work schedules where they might show up in the middle of the night.
Bro, I'm waking up everybody in the house.
Whatever it was. Sleigh bells ring, and then I hear what sounds like a pot, like a kitchen pot, fall and hit the linoleum floor in the kitchen. And I remember just the sound stood out to me. It just seemed like this person's kind of making a bit of a commotion in the middle of the night here. And the door didn't shut. And I noticed that. I figured they were maybe bringing their stuff in, right? They're offloading some stuff. And they're leaving the door open.
Okay.
Oh, this is... Just thinking about this is really making me feel uncomfortable. So I hear the footsteps in the wraparound porch. The door opens. I can hear the sleigh bells. A pot falls and it hits the linoleum floor. The footsteps that I could hear on the wraparound porch, because it's on stilts, right? Like the porch is hovering over the ground. You can hear those footsteps. Well, when these footsteps continued into the house, where you're on a concrete slab and there should be no sound, like I shouldn't hear echoing footsteps, it sounded like it was on the wraparound porch still. but the noise was getting closer to me. So it was like the footsteps sounded totally natural out on the wraparound porch, but once they were in the house, it didn't really make any sense that I could hear them as if the footsteps were standing on something that was suspended off the ground. But it wasn't. You're in the house on a concrete slab. And so I hear these footsteps. The door hasn't shut. The front door is wide open. We're in the middle of winter here. We're in the middle of nowhere too. And I'm thinking about that, but I'm still thinking it's got to be Nick's brother, one of Nick's brothers. The footsteps continue through the house, and they stop about halfway through the house. If you open that door and walk halfway through the house. And then the footsteps began to walk down the hallway towards our room. So they come down the hall. And they get right outside the door, which is shut. The door to our room is shut. And
this is right here where you play it sleep. You just be like, you do it real quick too, because you're not knowing whether they open the door or not. When they open the door, you say, damn. He seemed like he real scared. So this is bringing back some real traumatic childhood events.
I'm sitting there. Again, my feet are closest to the door. It's pitch black in the room, minus the, digital clock. And I'm thinking, why didn't they shut the front door? Of all the weird things that have happened, the fact that I'm hearing footsteps as if they're on the wraparound porch, but they're getting louder and moving through the house, the thing that really just made the hair on the back of my neck stand up was, why didn't they shut the front door? That just seems like such a bad idea. There's animals out there. There's a host of things out there. Like, why aren't you shut? And not to mention, it's freezing outside. There's a space between the bunk bed, the bottom bunk that I'm on, and the top bunk. There's a space that I can see clear as day. Whoever walks in the room, I'm gonna see them when they walk past the foot of the bed. But because of the top bunk, my view is actually obscured, and I wouldn't be able to make out someone's face, for example. I could really only see their middle section.
The mid-torso.
And so when the door opens and this shadow figure walks into the room,
The
which
hell?
by the way,
Bruh, the door opened? I didn't even think it was going to get that far. Hell no.
pitch black room, and I clearly make out a black silhouette. This thing walks into the room, and it's obscured, so I wouldn't have been able to see its head or upper body anyways, but its hips are so high that I can't even really see those. Those are at the level that I would expect someone's upper body or head to be at, meaning this figure that's walked in, its legs are extremely long, and so if it was proportionally the size of a human, you're talking about maybe a 10-foot tall person, but we're in a space that is not a 10-foot high ceiling. And so this thing walks in, and as soon as I see it, and I make out that black silhouette, even though it's pitch black in the room, I clearly see the silhouette that is unnaturally tall, combined with all the things that I've just thought about, mainly the door's still open. They've made kind of a commotion. I can hear these weird footsteps. I instantly was frozen with terror. Frozen. Petrified. I'm like, it's not Nick's brother. And even if we're not talking about paranormal here, this is such a bad situation. Even if that's just some dude who's come into the house, that's a really bad situation.
He's 10 feet tall though, bro. Like, that's not just some dude. Obviously, he know better than I do. It's his story, but he could play in the NBA though. He would be just standing up, dunking that hoe. Throw me the oop. Yeah. But damn. Me, I would play dead. I'm going to play asleep. I'm going to act like I'm not aware of what's going on. You know, a lot of kids is good at that, to where they can really close their eyes or squint their eyes to where you can barely see, you can barely peer through. But if somebody was somebody was looking at you real hard, they wouldn't be able to tell. That's what I would be doing. Or I would turn and face the other way. But then I thought about that, and it's like turning and facing the other way is probably one of the worst things you could do. You know, probably put a pillow up, put your face in it, maybe have one eye open or one eye up within view to squint through to act like you sleep, but you're really not. You know, you're keeping a lookout. Turning your back against whatever you see, that never works in horror movies. You turn around and then the room gets quiet. And then to your assumption, you think, oh, whatever it is left. Then right when you turn around, that thing's just staring you right in the face. Ah! All you hear is screaming and fade to black. You dead.
No matter what, this is a really bad situation, but what I'm looking at doesn't make sense. It's an unnaturally tall person. They've left the door open, and I hear their footsteps all over the house, and it walks in past the foot of the bed. And I'm laying there, and I can't see higher than its waist because it's obscured by the top bunk. And this thing makes this like facing movement, like a military facing movement, and begins to walk down the aisle between the queen size bed in the middle of the room and the bunk bed where I am. And it's walking down right next to me, and I'm literally sitting there unable to move. And I remember thinking, I can't do anything. I'm truly frozen with terror.
Bruh.
And all I remember thinking is, whatever happens, just don't bend down and look at me.
Bro.
That will ruin my life.
Close your eyes.
If this thing so much as looks at me, that's it. I'm done. So it walks down the aisle, and it's right next to me. I can't, I'm literally frozen. And it does another quick movement, but it's facing away from me now. Facing towards Nick in the center of the room. And it bows onto and then down through Nick's bed and disappears.
The hell?
In the movies, in a movie, as soon as the ghost disappears into the floor, whoever's hiding would make a run for it. In real life, there's no such thing as ghosts. There's no such thing as people disappearing into the ground. So I'm expecting this thing to just get back up again. I couldn't understand that it was,
He said in real life, there's no such thing as ghosts. Bro, tell that to like half the world who's experienced these paranormal activities. And you just experienced something paranormal. What you mean? Like, I mean, you know, call it what you want, an entity or whatever it is, man. But with that being said, to his point about being pretty much frozen in fear, right? I've never really experienced that. Being so scared I couldn't move. And, you know, hopefully I never have to. You know what I mean? But if I'm in a situation to where it's like fight or flight, life or death, I feel like I'm going to want to react. But the term being frozen in fear, I've never experienced it. Don't know what that's like. You know, let me know y'all's thoughts on that one in the comments down below. I mean, I've been in dreams to where I was literally frozen, like I couldn't move. But in reality, nah. But if you've experienced that, let me know, like, what it's like. And there's that one thing, what's it called? So where it's like sleep paralysis. Maybe, you know, that ties into it a little bit, but.
Disappear into the bed? That's not possible. Where is it? I heard the door open. I heard the bells. I heard the pot. I heard the footsteps. I saw the door open. I see the thing walk in. I watched it walk down the aisle. I watched it bend over. It's in the room. Where is it? And for hours, I mean, all night, I laid there absolutely petrified, expecting this thing to come back up and just look at me. That was like my biggest fear, is whatever this thing was, I did not want it to look at me. So that was the worst. I'm laying there frozen. I can only move my eyes all night. Finally, I hear Nick's mom out in the living room making coffee. I mean, this was probably like 5, 6
morning
in the morning.
time.
And it was like the first time that I'm like, okay, I'm safe now. Even if it's in the room, I'm safe to just go because I can hear someone out there. And I can hear her speaking. I knew it was her. And so I go right out there. And now you got to understand that even though this was a horrible situation that I still can't really explain, I know that she has just lost her husband. And so the idea of approaching this subject, which effectively is going to turn into ghosts, right? I've never had a paranormal experience before this. I've never had a paranormal experience since, right? Like I'm more or less a skeptic, and I'm going to go out there and I'm going to start talking about ghosts to the woman who's recently bereaved. It just felt really inappropriate. And so I was really struggling with how I wanted to communicate what happened. And so I went to the table, she got me a cup of coffee, and and we know each other well, you know, she knows me well. And she definitely picked up that something was wrong, but didn't really ask anything yet. She was just kind of puzzling, like kind of sizing me up a little bit. And the only thing I could think to do was to just ask, you know, hey, did either of your two sons, you know, Nick's older two brothers, did they stop by at any point last night? Did they stop by? And she's like, no. And I'm sitting there like, okay. And I'm just like, I must have had a reaction that was obvious to her.
He said,
And she just goes, I heard my husband here last night too. And, you know, that made it a lot worse.
thought he was going to say, man, that made me feel a whole lot better. Because I felt like I wasn't crazy and the only one hearing it. He said, that made it a whole lot worse.
Because on the one hand, you have a situation where she is confirming something that part of me hopes is a bad dream. Number two, she's now saying it's her husband. And so I intuitively assumed that she has somehow figured out what I'm stressed about that probably isn't real. And because she's grieving, she's created a story where her husband is now in the house, looking over us. I really believed that she didn't hear anything, that she just somehow understood that I had this weird feeling and she'd turned it into my husband's in the house.
I wonder what makes him think that, though. But carry on.
And I just couldn't ask any more questions at that point. I felt like I had set her up for this awkward exchange. I felt really bad that that was the discussion we were having. I also thought if that's true, I don't want to have this conversation. I really was just dumbfounded on what to do in this situation. And this is night one. There's 2 more nights of this, and it gets worse. So Nick and Wolf eventually come out of the bedroom, and they come to the dining room. And the same way I felt reserved talking to Nick's mom about what happened, I had the same feelings about Nick, because it was his father. And I also just felt like that would be inappropriate. But Wolf, he's not a family member, and he's my buddy, and I kind of pulled him aside, and I kind of told him what was going on as best as I could. I kept it kind of generic. I was like, I could have sworn I heard someone in the house last night. I could have sworn. And he's like, yeah, you're probably dreaming. That's what this is. And I was like, no, I wasn't, but I can't make sense of it. And I was like, can you just do me a favor? And at this point, Nick actually overheard the conversation, and I very much kind of cut ties with what I was talking about. I was like, yeah, I just thought I heard something last night. It's just me freaking myself out. And I was like, can you guys tonight, when we get back from snowboarding, can I fall asleep ahead of you? That way I'm asleep, you guys can just fall asleep after I do, and then I'll sleep through the night, no big deal.
This guy.
And they're like, all right, yeah, weirdo, whatever.
Yeah, how's that going to work?
Right. My big plan is I'm just going to go to bed really, really early. Because I didn't sleep the night before, so I'm thinking, I'll fall asleep right away. So we go out, we snowboard for the day. My mind is off of what happened. And frankly, I'm starting to convince myself that had to have been, sleep paralysis. Even though I'd never had that before. I was Googling some stuff. Maybe
there it
sleep
is.
Paralysis. Maybe it was just a really intense dream. I would just there has to be something. This is too weird. It has to be something explainable. Turns out it wasn't. We got back from snowboarding, and I am immediately going to bed. Pretty much immediately. It was maybe 6 o'clock. I was like, I'm going to bed. And I get in bed, and all I'm thinking about is what happened the night before, and I can't fall asleep. Eventually, Nick and Wolf, they come in the room, and they're trying their best to stay awake so that I can fall asleep, but it's getting later and later, and I can't fall asleep. And now I'm back to that, okay, if I fall asleep now, I get 6 hours of sleep. And they finally just said, hey man, I'm tired, I'm going to bed. So they both fall asleep, and I'm awake. And I was so upset with myself. You screwed yourself. Why didn't you just fall asleep, you dummy? And I remember the only thing that I did that really made this real, looking back at it, is I put a knife, a kitchen knife or something, in the springs above me. So I'm in the bottom bunk, basically right under the top bunk. I put a knife in there. And I'm laying in bed, and I'm constantly looking over at the digital clock. And it was probably around 3 a.m. It was late enough that it was okay, this is about the time that happened last night. And my heart just sunk when I heard those footsteps on the wraparound porch again. They sounded the same as they did the night before. I was like, that has to be one of Nick's brothers. But the door opens, I hear the sleigh bells, I hear the frickin' pot fall on the ground. It was like deja vu. The exact same thing is happening. And these footsteps start walking through the house. And again, referencing how movies would portray this, you know, the person who's me in the movie is like, okay, I'm gonna get this knife and I'm gonna position myself over here because I know what's gonna happen and I'm gonna protect myself. In real life, I'm like, this thing's gonna be in my room, potentially. It happened last night. It's apparently happening again. Please, for the love of God, don't bow into me the way it bowed into the floor the night before. Don't look at me. It will ruin my life. If some entity just engages with me, just looks at me, that will ruin my life. This thing walks down the hall, and I hear those footsteps coming down the hall. And just pretend for a second, forget the paranormal aspect. Pretend it's the middle of the night in the middle of nowhere, and a stranger is walking around your house. That alone is horrifying. The footsteps come right outside the door, and I'm looking at the knife that's right underneath the bed. And I'm petrified. I cannot move. I'm drenched in sweat. Just from the few seconds that it's taken this thing to go from the door to the front of my bedroom. Because I know what's happening again. It's happening again. I'm not crazy. It's just happening again. What the F is this? And I'm petrified. I can't reach. I'm so worried about making any noise that would alert this thing that I'm here. That it's I can only move my eyes. And I'm thinking that I shouldn't move my eyes too quickly because it might hear that. Like, this is a primal level of fear. The door opens. It walks into the room, goes right past the foot of my bed, and I'm, again, petrified. And it walks down, after making its facing movement, it walks down the aisle between me and Nick. And I remember what happened the night before, where it folded into Nick and disappeared, and I'm just thinking to myself, please don't turn and bow into me. Please, whatever happens, just don't do that. So it turns away from me and does the same thing it did the night before, folds onto Nick and disappears into the ground. But again, even though in the movies, this would be the same thing happening, you know, night two, it's the same routine. It'd be like, oh, the ghost is in the floor now. I can go alert the authorities because now it's safe. In real life, I'm like, where did it go? I know this happened last night, but it still doesn't make any sense. It's in the room. It has to be. This is a real thing. It came.
Who cares? My thing is, all right, so it's done the same thing twice. You know you got another night there. What's it, 3 nights they're staying out there? I mean, confirming that it did the same thing, and even prior to the second occurrence, I would probably already assume, okay, it did this last time. Of course, you're going to be in fear, wondering, all right, is it going to face me this time? Is it going to make eye contact with me? But you've already seen what it's done once, and now you've confirmed what it's done twice. Of course, I'd be scared, but it's like, at that point, if I knew I had one more night there and it's possibly going to happen again, I'd be already thinking, all right, this is its routine. It's going to do this and just keep bowing down into Nick or keep falling through the, pretty much just evaporating or disappearing through the floors. I'm not going to be that scared about it. I'm just not. I'm just going to, hey, this is the routine. Let's get ready to do it. Once again, night 3. Here we go, baby. That's just how I feel. That's just how I feel about it, you know.
Came in the room. It's somewhere. Is it under my bed? Where is it? All night. All night. I lay there. This is the second night that I've not slept. When I heard Nick's mom out in the other room, it was like such a relief. Because I didn't give a crap at this point about being polite. I wasn't going to try to, distance myself from the conversation around ghosts. I was going to go out there and be like,
boy.
what's wrong with this house? And so I hear her and I go right out to the living room and I tell her everything in as acute detail as I possibly can. And as I'm telling her this, her reaction didn't line up. Her reaction was not surprise, terror, confusion. It was empathy. She felt bad for me. It was sympathy. You don't understand. Like, I'm listening, but you just don't understand what's happening. And I'm telling her all the, I mean, every detail I can possibly muster. And at the end of it, or towards the end, she just kind of stops me. She's like, John, I told you yesterday, and again, I heard it last night. That's just my husband.
Cat.
I heard him last night too.
No, it's not.
Got nothing to worry about. And I was like, no. That cannot be. That cannot be what it is. And she was like, I heard him open the door. I heard the pot fall. I heard him walk through the house. I'm assuming he went into Nick's room again with you guys. And I'm like, what is happening? So totally now just beside myself. I remember I was crying, actually. Like, during this conversation, I'm just crying. Not even like tears of sadness as much as just like, what's happening? Like, I needed my mom. Like, I felt so helpless. And no offense to Nick's mom, but I just felt like I was with a lunatic. How? But like, at the same time, she's recalling the exact same things as me. How do I put that together? I remember thinking, I need to leave. I need to get out of here. I can't be here anymore. But then I thought about, like, how am I going to make this happen? Nick's mom and Wolf and Nick, they're not leaving today. And it was pretty clear that Nick's mom liked the fact that she, heard her husband walking around the cabin. She's not trying to leave.
Mm-hmm.
There's one more night that we're here, and I would have to tell my parents to drive, my mom or my dad, to drive to New Hampshire and come get me because I'm seeing ghosts. Like, this was a trip that I loved. I looked forward to this trip every year. It wouldn't have made any sense, and they would have been like, what's wrong with you? And I honestly was not prepared to have those conversations with my mom and dad. I was not prepared to be like, let me tell you about the ghost I saw over the past 2 days. And so I was just kind of resigned and decided to stay. In retrospect, I think I should have called my parents and been like, that's what parents are for. Like, get the hell up here. It doesn't matter why. Come get me. But it was such a confusing moment that I had no blueprint for how to handle. So I just stayed. Nick and Wolf finally get up. And I remember I made that decision as I'm sitting there thinking about what's happening, is Nick's mom is reassuring me, about her husband being in the house. And I make the decision that I'm going to stay. Nick and Wolf come out of the room, and they come over and
They come out, hey, yeah. I just sleep last night. Sleep good? These guys are sleeping like babies throughout the night. Nah, what's cracking?
Pretty much immediately looks at me to get a gauge on what happened. And you can see it all over my face. I've been crying. And I told them what happened. And, Nick was always kind of a stoic. And he was just unaffected, Wolf, on the other hand, was more inclined to, at a minimum, believe something was happening. He didn't know if it was a ghost or not, but he certainly understood that something's going on. And the fact that Nick's mom, as I'm explaining to Nick and Wolf what's going on, she was like reinforcing my argument. Yeah, I heard him too. I heard the door open. Yeah, I was upstairs. I heard him walk through the house. And Wolf's like, what's going on? And Nick is like, he didn't want to hear it, kind of. It probably was uncomfortable. It's about his father, or ultimately talking about his father. Before we went out snowboarding for the day, because Nick's mom would drive us and drop us off, she brought us to a local store, and we bought a coffee table because they've been looking to replace the one that was in their house. Basically, when you walk into the house, instead of turning down the hallway towards our room, if you just keep walking into the lofted area, at the foot of the stairs was a coffee table where they kept a landline phone because you're in the middle of nowhere and you got to have some way to call, and they put it right at the foot of the stairs in this little coffee table. But it had broken, or it was old, or whatever. I know they wanted a new one for a long time. We went out and got it. Me, Nick, and Wolf, we go, we snowboard. We come back, we help offload the coffee table into the house. We put it at the foot of the stairs. And that night we go to bed. I was ruthless in trying to keep Wolf and Nick awake. I mean, I wasn't even trying to make jokes out of it. I was like straight up kicking the bunk, kicking Wolf's bunk, like literally shaking Nick. I was doing everything in my power to keep them awake because
And it still didn't work.
I'm terrified. It was like the opposite of how excited you get before Christmas and you can't sleep. It was like the opposite of those feelings, but you still can't sleep. It was like, this is the worst night of my life. And also, the nail in the coffin, if you will, is during the day that day, we found out that neither of Nick's two brothers were going to be making the trip. They weren't going to make it.
But at this point, you already know it's not, they're irrelevant. So who cares? Like, are you saying that because they were like reinforcements, just additional protection, or just they would have made you feel safer? At this point, you already know what it is. It's not his brothers.
Be at the house. No one should be at the house except for us. And so that night I'm laying there, and after all my attempts to keep Nick and Wolf awake, they fall asleep. Everyone's asleep. The house is pitch black.
I need to get my beauty sleep, my boy.
Silent. And around 2, 3 in the morning, I'm getting goosebumps just thinking about it. I hear those footsteps on the wraparound porch. The door opens, and I hear the sleigh bells.
See, at this point in time, this is when I'd wake up Nick and Wolf. Like, this is where you need to be kicking the bed. Like, listen, guys, listen. But what? Let me guess, he was probably shocked in fear or frozen in fear at this point.
The door, a pot falls on the ground, and the footsteps walk into the house. And this is the third time that this has happened. So
third time's a charm, my boy.
The first time that I was expecting something to happen, for it to walk down the hall, to come in the room, to come next to me, fold into Nick, and then that's it. This was the first time I had a little bit of, call it security, that something was going to happen, and I understood what was going to happen. I didn't understand it, but I expected something to happen. But this was not the case this night. It walked into the house. Everything was the same. It walked into the house, but instead of going down the hallway towards our room, it kept walking into the lofted area. And the lofted area, from where I was laying, my foot's at the door, my head's back here, the wall straight, if I like sat up in bed and looked straight, the wall right there led into the area where this thing was. So I'm basically, if there wasn't a wall, I'd be looking dead at this thing. And I'm waiting for it to walk through the wall.
Yeah.
As crazy as that sounds, I'm just anticipating something coming through the wall. After a long pause of it being in that lofted area, I hear it go up the steps. Listening to the creak of the steps as it goes up the steps, it makes my skin crawl. It's making me like emotional thinking about how terrifying that was. It walks up the stairs, and now it's above me. And if the past 2 nights are any example, this thing has sunk into the ground 2 nights in a row and disappeared. And so now my fear is it's going to literally come through the ceiling, through the bunk, onto me. The sound stopped when it was upstairs. Got upstairs, and that's where Nick's mom slept. She was upstairs. So I laid in bed, petrified once again. I got my stupid knife sitting in the underside of the bed above me. And hours and hours of waiting for my literal worst nightmare to come true as some entity comes through the ceiling and goes into me. Or even just if it was like onto Nick, if it came through the ceiling and if out of my peripheries I'm watching like this beast come through the ceiling and float down and into Nick. It just, these thoughts in my head, they didn't make any sense. They were terrifying, but they were happening. I laid in bed and I couldn't fall asleep. I was now coming up on 3 days without sleep. So at some point that night, I did fall asleep, probably just out of sheer exhaustion. At some point in the morning, early morning, now probably like 5 in the morning, I wake up again and I can hear Nick's mom. It didn't sound like she was making coffee. It sounded like something was wrong. I couldn't place it, but it just sounded like she was acting emotional somehow. I couldn't tell if she was crying or not. But now it's like it's the morning, it's my last day, I'm leaving today, I'm up, I'm out. And as soon as I walk out of the hallway and I look to the left into the dining room where I expect to see Nick's mom, and she's not there. And she's actually over at the foot of the stairs in the lofted kind of living room area. next to this new coffee table we had just put in. And she's standing over this coffee table at the foot of the stairs where the entity had been the night before, the one deviation from the other 2 nights. And she's crying. Come here. She points to the coffee table. And she's down on her knees looking at the table. And now I can tell she's probably crying tears of joy. Because scratched into the coffee table were the words, "I love you." I was like, I'm done. That ended my friendships with certainly Nick. Wolf to a lesser degree, but I stopped snowboarding. I didn't go back to that cabin, even though I know Wolf did the next year. The theories about what happened, Nick's mom, it's possible she could have created a narrative, made it about her husband, and then she could have just as easily scratched that into the table.
Yeah.
The "I love you." That could have been her. It's also possible that she had sleep paralysis and I had sleep paralysis, and somehow we synchronized and had the same vision, and she scratched into the table. Or, to be honest, what I believe, that was a ghost, and that it interacted with the physical world, and it did walk around the house. It did carve "I love you" into that table. That's the only time in my entire life that I've had anything happen like that. I don't have any other paranormal stories before or after. That's it. I hope you enjoyed that. I'm going to continue to do long versions of my ghost stories and scary stories that I find that I've been posting on TikTok. I'm going to do long versions of those on this.
That right there is "What I Saw in My Room Still Haunts Me" by MrBallen. So that was some of his early content there, man. Please don't tell me so. You telling me my display capture wasn't up the whole time, man? Why didn't y'all tell me that, bro? Damn. So yeah, there goes that reaction. Bro, I hate when that happens, bro. I don't get the webcam up right. That's why I need dual monitors to be running this stream or whatever, using Streamlabs. But hey, "What I Saw in My Room Still Haunts Me," MrBallen reaction. Let me know y'all's thoughts on that one in the comment section below. Like, comment, subscribe, hit the notification bell. Follow me on Instagram, Twitter at FortWorthFabian. Road to 1 million, man. Peace, love. We out.